Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show, the Hromadske International, the only prime-time TV program and discussion explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English. I'm Natalia Humanyuk, and that's what we have prepared for you tonight. Ukraine will receive autocephaly, says Ecumenical Patriarch, while the 1686 annexation of the Kiev Metropolitanate by the Russian Orthodox Church is now recognized as illegal by the Synod in Istanbul. What does it mean for Ukraine and the region? What's next? We discuss with renowned scholar Cyril Hovorun and journalist and philosopher Volodymyr Yermolenko. We also look at Russia's future in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which this week voted to postpone talks on the country's reinstatement. So my colleague Volodya Yermolenko, who is a journalist and an editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld.org initiative explaining also world to international audience, is here with us. So great to have you here. And you were following the topic in details. And I think from what we should start, it's really the top news, and internationally as well. A lot of people didn't understand what this church thing is. You know, autocephaly is definitely a very complex term. Ukrainian independence of the Ukrainian church from the Russian church is probably something more comprehensible. But let's give the understanding to the people. What does it mean? How big is it?
Well, I think it's very big because if we take into account how much Russian Orthodox Church is connected with politics and how much Russian Orthodox Church is trying to be a soft power in Ukraine but also in post-Soviet world. We've seen, for example, how Russian Orthodox Church was supporting pro-Russian politicians and Ukrainian Orthodox Church linked to Moscow Patriarchate, how it was even supporting the separatism. And I think this is the most important thing, that Ukrainian Orthodox believers are going away from it.
But the way you put it, it's really like purely political. However, Istanbul, the Orthodox Church in Constantinople, says it's something different. And I think it's also probably historically not because of exactly what's going on, it's just the window of opportunity. It's about something which was going on for centuries, not decades, thousands of years. So really, what do you think, why it matters for the region? If we're not thinking in the span of just Russian-Ukrainian recent war?
Well, we can think of it as a kind of a comeback to initial situation, because it's it's well known that Orthodox Christianity in Kiev was much earlier than in Moscow. If we talk about the Moscow Patriarchate, is a rather late event. It's just the end of 16th century. And it has also political implications because finally it was a period when Constantinople was not that strong, when it fell to Turks and etc. So why it is so long? Because the key date is basically the end of 17th century, when during some very interesting events the Kiev Church, the Kiev Orthodox Church, was kind of transferred from Constantinople to Moscow. And if you look at this event, some historians are saying that it was kind of a very dubious event involving a little bit of corruption, etc. But the thing is that even the conditions of this transfer were not fulfilled by the Moscow Orthodox Church, because under those conditions, during the ceremonies, Russian Orthodox Church should have mentioned the Patriarchate, the Constantinople Patriarchate. They were not doing that, and this is why Constantinople is now saying that basically it goes back and takes again the supremacy, I would say, or sovereignty over Ukrainian.
Before we go, we also have with the scholars to discuss, the religious scholars to explain what will happen next, but probably we have to also go into the explanation that Ukraine has three Orthodox churches. It's Moscow Patriarchy and the Kiev Patriarchy. As well, there is another autocephaly church, which is the smallest. And I think even like a lot of Ukrainians don't understand what I understand from the figures, that there are 12,000 communities in the country belonging to the Moscow Patriarchy and 6,000 parishes belonging to Kiev Patriarchy. While important to understand that there are number of the parishes, they are smaller in the Kiev Patriarchy, while the number of the people coming communities is twice higher in the Kiev Patriarchy, which was for a while considered to be, let's say, not fully legal, not fully legit. That was the question, and I think it's also important to explain that to the audience that beside that during this week decision, what had happened that was that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate has more or less become legal. So these events of the 70th centuries of the annexation of the part of the church were considered illegitimate. As well, the Patriarch Filaret, the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev Patriarchy, the anathema has been cancelled.
That's the most important thing. Let me explain that the existence of autocephalous church, which exists now, it's also very important, Ukrainian autocephalous church, because it shows how long the efforts were to get this autocephaly, because we can count from the first attempts of Ukrainian independence from early 20th century. So it's also important. Now, why is this confusion between patriarchies? I think it's important to explain to the audience. Kiev Patriarchy indeed is self-proclaimed patriarchy. And it was considered as illegal, indeed, not only from the Moscow eyes, but from other Orthodox churches. Therefore, it can be said that it is a real patriarchy. What's now going on is that the Constantinople Patriarch lifts the anathema from Filaret and Makary, the representatives of this Kiev Patriarchy and autocephalous church. They become legal, and on the basis of the fact that they become legal, so they are not schismatics, they can form a new autocephalous church. That's the most important.
And I suggest we watch the quote from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate Patriarch.
We, the archbishops of all three churches, are now legitimate, canonical and blessed. And now, with our good will, we can unite into the single Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which will then be recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarch. The creation of a united Orthodox Church in Ukraine does not mean that other churches cannot exist on our Ukrainian territory. It means that the Russian Church will now be just called Russian because those Ukrainian dioceses which are not joining the united Ukrainian Orthodox Church will not have the right to call themselves a Ukrainian Church. But they will still have equal rights, they will just be called Russian and not Ukrainian.
And we have Madrid, Cyril Hovorun, who is a professor at Loyola Marymount University and probably one of the Ukrainian top religious scholars currently in the Los Angeles with us. And thanks so much for being with us. And obviously the question, we're talking now for international audience, is that what's next? What the decision of today means, of this week means, and what still should have happened, because there is still no independence of the Ukrainian church. It's just three churches which still have to be united. So let us know.
It was a preliminary decision by the Ecumenical Patriarchate to restore its metropolia, which existed before the end of the 17th century, and to recognize the faith of the so-called schismatic that recognized as members of the church. I believe the part that is the important one in the synodal document by the Ecumenical Patriarchate of the 11th of October. It essentially means that the faithful who were regarded as part of the schismatic groups, they are full members of the church. So the most important issue of the Ukrainian church has been solved. But not every issue has been solved. And while the faithful have been recognized as members of the church, the existing ecclesial groups like the Kiev Patriarchate and the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church have not been recognized. Well, they are supposed to actually to abolish themselves, to declare themselves kind of non-existent, and to establish a new church. In this regards, the new church will be not a sum of the existing churches. It will be a sum of the existing people, of the existing bishops, the clergy, and the faithful. They're going to establish a new church. This church will be probably founded in the upcoming months, maybe in November, maybe in December. And this church will be given autocephaly. The Tomos from the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which will recognize this church as a fully full member of the rest of the Orthodox churches.
And give us also maybe more details, so because really that makes a lot of people confused. So still there would be the process when the clergy and also the communities, the parishes should decide to which church they would like to belong, and then they should gather together and, you know, like elect a new patriarch. And so you said a couple of months, but really for how long this process should last, and who should initiate these changes? Are the local communities? Like, can you really still describe maybe in details what it means for the people in the country?
Right, yes. Well, first of all, we don't know exactly when this will happen. It may happen rather sooner than later, hopefully. It will be an initiative of the bishops. Who will come from all three churches in Ukraine: the bishops of the Moscow Patriarchate, the bishops of the Kiev Patriarchate, and the bishops of the Autocephalous Church. So they will come together on their own initiative. It will be their own initiative. They will not be invited to join this council, and they will found a new church. This church will constitute an alternative. It will be a second kind of, or maybe the first church in Ukraine next to the Moscow Patriarchate, meaning that the Moscow Patriarchate will continue existing in Ukraine, and for all communities in Ukraine, for all Orthodox people in Ukraine, there will be two options to choose between: either to join the new church, the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church, or to remain in the Moscow Church. The choice will be kind of sacrosanct. And if people choose to stay in the Moscow Patriarchate, their choice should be protected by the state. They should not be forced to join another church. However, if they want to join the Autocephalous Church, they will be able to do so. They didn't have such an option so far. The options that they had so far was either to stay in the only canonical church under the Moscow Patriarchate, or to join one of the unrecognized churches. So the choices of people in Ukraine now are much better. Either, as I said, to stay in the Moscow Patriarchate, or to become a member of the new Autocephalous Church in Ukraine. And so that will be the next step after the establishment of the church.
And Kirill, now we're coming to the Russian Orthodox Church. There was a very, let's say, I would use the word even like the angry reaction. Yes, there were some criticism to Istanbul, to Patriarch Bartholomew, and also to the fact that he sent his people to Kiev. There are the official quotes from the Russian Church threatening some kind of religious divide. So what we know, how really, from the church position, can you describe this relations? Because still the Russian Orthodox Church is under the Constantinople Patriarch. They are lower on the hierarchy. What we can expect, and also maybe give us geopolitical context, because there are other churches. Would it mean that they would have something to say, like the church in Serbia or in Greece or any other Orthodox churches?
Right, yes. Well, from now, the Church of Constantinople considers the Ukrainian issue its internal issue. The matter that is relevant only to the Ecumenical Patriarchate because it has restored, by its decision on 11th of October, it has restored its jurisdiction, its kind of control over the Ukrainian church. And the Ecumenical Patriarchate thinks that it has every right to manage its own church. The Russian church does not think so. It still believes that this territory of Ukraine belongs to the jurisdiction of Moscow. So there are two different interpretations. They are clashing interpretations, and of course the Ukrainian people is more interested, in siding with the interpretation of Constantinople because this effectively liberates the Ukrainian territory from the Russian jurisdiction. So we have two disputing or clashing interpretations of what is going on, what is the status of the Ukrainian church. And of course, these two interpretations, they have political connotations. Because for the Russian church, obviously, to keep Ukraine under its ecclesial control means keeping it under its political control. That's why the Russian government has become heavily engaged in the Ukrainian situation. As we know, there was a session of the Security Council of Russia recently, which discussed the Ukrainian ecclesial matters. However, I believe that for Constantinople, it is much less a political issue, but it is much more a pastoral matter. It really cares about Ukrainian people and wants to give a solution to the Ukrainian schism. This pastoral interest of Constantinople to give a solution to the Ukrainian situation coincides with the political interest of Ukrainian authorities like the President Poroshenko, also to give a solution to the Ukrainian issue on the ecclesial issue on the one hand, on the other hand, to help his own campaign. I don't see any problem in when these two kind of movements coincide with one another, if they help one another. So far, there is no clash between the political interest of Poroshenko's affair and the pastoral interest of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. As regards the rest of the Orthodox churches, they are watching still. Only a few of them have issued some sort of statements, which are rather cautious. They don't want to become a part of the fight between Moscow and Constantinople, and I hope they will preserve this rather kind of cautious and neutral stand.
Kirill, thanks a lot. That was Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, who is is a very renowned scholar on religion, the Ukrainian one, but based in the US predominantly. And Volodya, just following up the discussion, I think nobody here really thinks that this issue is not political. Because, of course, it's connected to the war. Also, Ukraine is coming to the presidential elections. They would take place next April. And the world church, is in the official campaign of the Ukrainian president. So really a lot of people think, would be used and politicized. And when it politicized, of course, the Ukraine kind of lived without religious divide. It was a religious diversity, but it may happen.
Well, there are many questions. I mean, first we can say that how Russians are reacting on that, and I'm shocked with the way how Moscow Patriarchate is reacting to to the whole situation, because they are basically now saying that the Constantinople Patriarchate are schismatics and they should be under anathema. And imagine, for example, Kirill was saying that Ukrainians now have a free choice between two legitimate churches, between Moscow Patriarchate and a newly established autocephalous church. But I suspect that Moscow Patriarchate will be saying that, look, this autocephalous church accepted by Constantinople is not legitimate, because even Constantinople today is not legitimate. So we can expect, unfortunately, some attempts to divide more. And the whole idea, I fully agree with Kirill, is to unify Ukrainian churches to overcome this schism, but the way how the Russians will use it.
What you would say that that's probably not the right moment? I mean, I'm also referring to a lot of people who kind of approach us and say that, you know, like, why you do that this time? Why you do that in the time when there is already Russia is putting so much to divide this country and you kind of nail it down prior to the election?
But I think the intention is not to divide. I mean, the intention is to unify, because the division was when, because I mean, let's be honest, the Kiev Patriarchy was becoming more and more popular. If you go to the public opinion polls, you see that more and more people are supporting rather Kiev Patriarchy than the Moscow Patriarchy, but those people are feeling themselves illegitimate. So I think it's a right moment to do them a legitimate cause. But when we are talking about why Constantinople Patriarchy is doing, I mean, you cannot be autocephalous legitimately without support of the Constantinople. And now we have this momentum for 100 years, for the first time for 100 years. I think it would be stupid for Poroshenko not to use it.
And I would suggest we watch the video which were recorded today in Kiev and asking the residents what do they think.
I think autocephaly is a good thing for any nation that respects itself, because it makes the church ours. There is a separate Georgian church, and that's right. Every nation that considers itself a separate nation has its own church. Not only it's a good thing, we also completely changing the course for our country. We move into independence. We will now be more of a part of civilized world. Moscow Patriarchate representatives, in my opinion, behave in quite a provocative way. I think for a long time Russian government and church have been practically acting as one, and that's not okay, because they should be independent from each other. It's very important. I'm very happy about it.
Why do you think it's important?
We have an independent country, so we should have an independent church. It's due to the fact that we've lived next to Russia and shared the same church for such a long time, that they had such big influence over us. Now it will be smaller, and that's a good thing in my opinion.
How do you think the situation in the country will be changed?
It will all be for the better. Gradually, we'll all be getting better results. It's bad. It's bad.
Why?
Because it's a schism. It's bad. In our opinion. Our opinion is that it's bad. I think it's a very good thing, because we live in Ukraine and it would be good to have a Ukrainian church and not of some other patriarchate, like Moscow's. I think people who used to go to church, whatever church that was, will carry on going to churches because prayers unite us all. It doesn't matter what language the church services are carried out in. But it's a very good thing for Ukraine and its spirit to have our own church in Ukrainian language. Plus, the entire world will now be recognizing our church, as I know that wasn't the case before, and we were forced to attend and get married in Russian churches. An independent state needs an independent church, especially these days, when there is a war going on. Be independent on the state, which hasn't been loyal to us, to put it mildly. So I support autocephaly and uniting our three churches into one. I think it can unite patriotic people in the country, but it can also spark some additional problems from those who don't support the idea. But I really hope we will be wiser and realize that a united country needs a united church. It will only make us stronger. I really want to believe it will. I think there's only one God, for Russians and for Ukrainians. I'm Russian by blood, and I've been living in Ukraine for 50 years, so it doesn't make much difference to me. I think it's bad. What do you mean why? Because we're Orthodox and we attend that church.
Do you mean of Moscow Patriarchate?
Moscow, not Moscow. Of Kiev. We live in Kiev. It doesn't matter what patriarchate. It's our church, and I don't want it to be separated.
But they are saying quite the opposite, that the churches will unite.
I doubt it. I highly doubt they will. There will be distress, God forbid, but I think there will be.
What do you think can happen? A schism?
Of course, of course. Do you think people will agree to this? For example, I don't agree. I'm sorry.
So events are unfolding very fast. I think nobody would even believe a couple of months that those things will take place, something from the history of the last 400 centuries. But I have a different question. Some people also say that like it's 2018. you know, Ukraine is speaking about like technology coming to the global world, everything else, and all of a sudden the key thing of the discussion and like kind of the bigger thing in the campaign is the church.
Is it strange? Yeah, of course.
I think it might be. It might be for somebody, because especially if you're really concerned usually about any kind of like play with the religion. Doesn't matter fair it is it like bringing the historical case to kind of a fair conclusion?
Well, I can agree with one of the person who was saying that the God is only one God in the Christianity. So I think we should not overestimate all these divides. But I think it is also important to say what we were saying from the very beginning, that Russia is using its church, the Moscow Patriarchy, as its soft power and influencing hearts and minds of Ukrainians. And instead of the war, instead of Russian aggression, I think it's very important to defend against it.
And I also suggest we show some of the video of, for instance, today. Yeah, today was an interesting day because it's officially the day of the Ukrainian soldier, historically, but as well, and here you see the Lavra, one of the most important churches for the Russian Orthodox Church and one of the most important in Ukraine, just near Hromadske. You usually see it here, now it's dark. So you had some of the people coming, it's Sunday, it's the holiday for the believers, so there was no clashes, but as well today Ukraine has the Day of the Ukrainian Soldier, which is a historic date, but as well it's also the day of the Ukrainian Resistance Army UPA. So some of the nationalistic forces are coming to the march. It was always kind of the day for them to show the force, and we were expected that might be in particular, you know, when there is this decision on Istanbul and when there is the march, that something would happen. There were some clashes, but there were no really kind of injured or anything. But really, what are also your concerns? You know, like you sound positive, but you really, what are the concerns and what do you think we could be done that some of the political forces who can use the whole issue of the autocephaly, you know, use it? Because the real estate of the Russian Orthodox Church is still there. Their churches are still there. Definitely they will do something, but it also depends on a lot of the reactions.
Well, first let me begin from what you said, that today is a day of defenders, of soldiers, and I think it's very important for international audiences to remember that the war is going on, that these people are protecting Ukraine, not only Ukraine, and that we still have news about the people dead on the front. With regards to your question, I think it's very important really to keep it calm. And I think what Constantinople Patriarchate was saying and the Synod what was saying, it's important to avoid clashes. And I think that Ukrainian government will be very interested now to really not to avoid these clashes. For example, if we talk about Lavra, who is really under control of the Moscow Patriarchy, my forecast, my kind of, I talked to some people who are in this issue. I think the priority should be given to evolution, long evolution process, because we have so much parishes in, for example, even in the Western Ukraine, which are on the Moscow Patriarchy, and they will be gradually moving to this new autocephalous church. And I think, for example, the fears that this autocephalous church will be taking over the Lavra, I think they are very overestimated.
Okay, so I think we have to look closely, and we will do that. Thanks for this part. We'll moving to a different one, which you were also following a lot as a journalist. So the Parliament Assembly of the Council of Europe has postponed the vote on changing the sanctions mechanism for Russia this week, which means that Moscow will now stay out of Parliament Assembly of the Council of Europe until the January of the next year. So how significant is that? Because I think like also for the general public, even among our audience, you know, these institutions, what's going on, it doesn't look that much important as well, especially when a lot of people are disappointed on the efficiency of those institutions.
Let me explain first what is Council of Europe. It's the oldest democratic institution in Europe, and it integrates almost all the countries except Belarus. Parliamentary Assembly is the parliamentary wing of this organization, and this institution imposed sanctions on Russia in 2014 for annexing Crimea and the aggression in Ukraine. And the conditions for lifting these sanctions were very strict. In 2016, the PASE was saying that basically the key conditions was giving Crimea back to Ukraine and stopping the war on Donbass. Of course, Russia is not doing that. So what it was trying to do from 2016 is to come back to this organization without fulfilling its conditions. And that was why Ukrainian diplomacy, Ukrainian journalists, activists were so furious about. Now, it's a kind of a very hypocritical what Russia was trying to do is basically to come back how, with the way of reforming PASE, Parliamentary Assemblation of Council of Europe, so it cannot impose any sanctions on violators. So making this organization kind of a conversation club. And it didn't happen. I think it's very good that it didn't happen because Russia does not feel impunity. But the story is not over. Of course, we know that this is a TV series which goes on every year.
And about the TV series, I probably would suggest we also look and discuss. There is a viral video this week also there. Little things happened there. It's in Strasbourg, but this time there was a famous, probably one of the most famous Russian TV anchors, who is the TV anchor of the federal channel Россия, trying to reach the Ukrainian MPs who were singing the Ukrainian anthem. And that would largely discuss, so I suggest you also pay attention.
Украинские депутаты, друзья, товарищи, обратите, пожалуйста, внимание, это вот лицо современной Украины, точнее, мы должны с вами понимать, конечно, современные власти. Представитель Дмитрия Яроша, посмотрите, прекрасно
I congratulate Boris Nemtsov with his birthday. I believe that the goals and ideas that he was fighting for will win. I'm sorry that Nemtsov was killed by the Kremlin. I'm sorry that Anna Politkovskaya was killed by the Kremlin. I'm sorry that the Kremlin is murdering Oleg Sentsov, Volodymyr Baluch, and other Ukrainian political prisoners. This is done directly by the Kremlin. And Russians, I hope you will win and get rid of Vladimir Putin and his clique.
Somehow that's now how the Ukrainian politicians communicate with governmental Russian channels. But really, let us know what to look after.
Well, I think it's important how Russia will try to play the situation because let's remember that it's not paying to the budget of the Council of Europe, although it is a member of the Council of Europe. So it's kind of a conflict, and this is the payments of Russia are basically a very important contribution to Council of Europe budgets, and therefore it can create kind of a crisis. Although I don't believe it's kind of an unavoidable crisis because the sums are not that high. I think it's about 7% of the budget or something like that. And now Russia is threatening to withdraw from the Council of Europe, and this is something quite bad, I think, for the whole continent. But again, this is blackmail, and when Council of Europe is facing a situation where Russia comes back to one of these institutions with impunity, or it withdraws from it, well, it should choose, and I think the right choice should be accept Russia withdrawal if it decides to do so. But the propaganda is that Russian propaganda sometimes is saying that the Council of Europe is wanting to expel Russia from the Council of Europe. I'm sure this is not going to happen. What Russia can do and what it threatens to do is to withdraw itself.
And I suggest we also watch the comment. I had a chance earlier to talk to Nils Muzhnieks, who was the Commissioner of the Council of Europe from 2012 till 2018, till April this year. And he is a bit changing his opinion also on possible Russian withdrawal.
Well, I think there are huge divisions within Council of Europe member states and between different political groups about what to do in this case. Because there are many countries that want to keep all, not just Russia, but other countries that have very problematic human rights records at all costs. And there are others that say, listen, if we allow this to go on, then the whole organization is discredited. They're huge debates. All I know is that if nothing happens by next spring, if Russia has not paid its past owed contributions, then automatically a process whereby Russia might be expelled from the Council of Europe kicks in. There will be, I'm sure, some want to change the rules so that would not happen. But if nothing changes on the financial front, then automatically, 2 years you haven't paid your dues, the process of you being excluded from the organization begins. I think that would be a shame. But because I think that there are many people, many human rights defenders and journalists and others in Russia who look to the Council of Europe, who look to the European Court of Human Rights with hope. They want to see it implemented, they want to see their country abide by it, and they want to use that to defend their rights. I would like to see Russia have good relations with Ukraine to abide by its human rights obligations. But what concerns me more, actually, is if Russia remains in and undermines the system from within, then I would rather have it out. For example, if it systematically refers cases from the European Court of Human Rights to the Constitutional Court of Russia, and the Constitutional Court says, oh, we cannot implement this judgment, then what is the benefit to the citizens of Russia of their membership in the Council of Europe? So I think the question we have to ask is, do the citizens of Russia derive any benefit from Russia's membership in the Council of Europe? Until recently, I would answer that in the positive. I would say less and less, but still, there are many people who derive benefit. What will be the case by the time this vote comes around in March, it's difficult for me to say. But it's been on a declining trend, the benefits that Russian citizens derive from membership in the Council of Europe.
So, Volodya, thanks a lot for coming here and explaining those two complex but kind of critical stories on the church and also on the membership on the Council of Europe. And thanks for watching. I would just remind that with the Sunday show, we are here now every Sunday, but you also should go on our Twitter and Facebook pages. They are updated 24/7. Search Hromadske International, and as well our webpage en.hromadske.ua with all the best stories. There are a lot of reports and the background reports also on the issues we've discussed today. And sign up for our newsletter so you'll have the weekly updates, not too much often, and you'll have a chance not to miss anything which is happening in Ukraine and in the region. So thanks a lot and see you in a week.